Another edition of PRosé with Vicki Locke and Cindy Woolley from C2 Communications.
Cheers, everybody.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. What are you drinking today?
I am still on my kick with this In Sheep's Clothing. It's a Pinot Noir.
Okay. I'm doing Veuve champagne in my Bubbles and Bling little Yeti cup. It's so good, so delicious.
It's all about the bubbles and bling, eh?
Well, ever since we had a couple of the authors we've had on say whenever their book comes out, that's all they drink is champagne because they're celebrating. And I said, well, since we're doing PRosé, that's a good excuse as any to start drinking champagne at least once a week.
Of course.
And Thanksgiving is coming up, so I've got to know because Bridget, your daughter, is vegan. You're going to be celebrating before she goes to have Thanksgiving with her dad. So what are you cooking for Turkey Day?
So a Turkey Day in our house is more like vegan day. And I've always had options, like if we do a meat option, we'll have a main dish option. And this year it's going to be like a mushroom stroganoff, just big and hearty and over mashed potatoes and probably some green beans and I'm thinking pumpkin pie. Pecan pie. Pecan pie is my favorite.
So mushroom stroganoff is the main dish?
Mm-hmm.
That's not Thanksgiving. I'm just saying.
When you're vegan and gluten-free, Yeah.
Isn't turducken or something like that? Isn't that what vegans usually make?
A turducken is like, that's meat on meat on meat.
Okay, what am I thinking then? What is the strange word that the fake turkey?
There's soy loaves out there and there's the alternative meats, but we can't eat soy either. So,
okay. So you'll be drinking a lot.
Yeah. What about you? Are you bringing turkey or are you bringing wine?
I'm going to see my family, hopefully everybody, for the first time in like 2 years. So I'm so excited. And yeah, we're going to have turkey and stuffing and all the good stuff that you need, mashed potatoes and pie and lots of room to take naps afterwards. So it's going to be very festive. Lots of great wine will be flowing. I'll be bringing some and it'll be a good time. But I'll think of you and your mushroom stroganoff.
Well, let's give a little cheer out to our friends at the Farm City Barbecue, Wednesday the 24th in Collier County, 65th anniversary on replay because the 65th event was canceled last year due to COVID. So it's always fantastic to bring a community together. If you are in Southwest Florida around the holiday, look it up. FarmCityBBQ.com, and the steaks will be hot, the music will be hot, and the beer will be cold. So
yummy. How much are tickets?
Tickets are $25.
What a steal.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get to it. PRosé, here we go. Okay, I'm going to throw out some names. Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, Prince Harry, Demi Lovato, Adele, Lady Gaga. What do they all have in common? Okay, they are celebrities, but they have all opened up about their mental health issues. Globally, depression is one of the leading causes of illness and disability among adolescents. And our guest today is psychoanalyst, clinical social worker, and parenting expert, Erica Komisar. Her latest book is Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. We raise a glass to Erica. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Are you drinking with us or can you not do it because you're on the job?
I am on the job though, so I'm not drinking wine. Otherwise, I will not make sense when I'm telling you all this important information. but I will have a drink in our honor after.
Okay, that sounds good. Now, is it true that 1 in 5 adolescents today in 2021 suffers from mental anxiety issues? Is that true?
1 in 5 children and adolescents will have a severe mental health disorder, and in terms of anxiety, it's the numbers are greater. At least 30 to 40% of all adolescents will suffer from anxiety in America, and so yeah, almost 1 in 2.
Now, did we just not have these statistics when we were kids? Because I'm thinking either my parents were the worst parents on the planet or they were geniuses. Because I remember growing up, it was go outside and play and come back in when it's dark. And if we had any issues or got into any scuffles or anything happened with our friends, we kind of dealt with it ourselves. Am I just kidding myself?
Well, I mean, I think there's a heightened awareness about mental health issues today, but I don't think that's the whole picture, because I think the world has changed since those days. And so what, I'm 57, and I remember the world being a much more simple place as an adolescent in some ways, meaning there's much more academic pressure and more competition than ever before, much more than when I was growing up. And you know, even the prospects of getting into college, it just wasn't such a major pressure. It was, you know, you knew you'd go to a good college, you did as well as you could on these darn tests, and you got on with things. Today, there's a lot of pressure on kids to be excellent. We weren't forced to be excellent. B's were good. They were good enough. You know, you didn't have to get A's. Today, the pressure is on kids to be superior, to be excellent, to be perfect. And as I said, there's more competition, more emphasis on achievement. And then you have all of this kind of overload, sensory overload, social media overload, and a lot of what is in the environment today, things like social media, things like these environmental threats and global warming threats and job and economic insecurity that it abounds, right, in the environment. So it's a more challenging environment than ever before. So you'd say the stress has increased. And as I write in my first book and this book, we're asking more of kids, but giving less.
So what do you mean by giving less?
Mm-hmm. So to be resilient to adversity and stress, you have to have a foundation of emotional security. And that means that from the very beginning of their lives, it means being as emotionally and physically present as possible, particularly in 2 critical windows of right brain development. So the right brain, we know, is the social emotional part of the brain, which is responsible for things like emotional regulation, resilience to stress, empathy, the ability to live in a social environment and interact socially. All of these things, executive functioning, working memory, these are all in the right brain. And what we know is in these 2 critical windows, 0 to 3, and adolescence, which is 9 to 25, much longer than we thought, parents have this opportunity, because they are a majority of that child's environment. They have the opportunity to create that emotional security and that foundation for mental health going forward. And we live in a very distracted world. We live in a more self-centered world, a more self-determined world. Parents are less willing to sacrifice what they need to sacrifice in those early years and also later, to be as present as possible. You know, we've become a me world, you know, my career, my interests, my time, me. And I think it's really done a lot of harm to our children.
I can definitely understand that. You know, in looking back, I think there were some misconceptions about your first book where people said that you were advocating for women to stay home, but I didn't get that perception at all. I think it was more about emotional connection, right?
Well, it was about prioritizing. So it wasn't binary. So I never advocate binary. It wasn't stay home and you're good, stay home and you're good and go to work and you're not good. It wasn't like that. It was like, whatever you choose to do, you have to be as emotionally and physically present as possible for that child, because of this moment to moment emotional regulation that parents are responsible for in the first 3 years. And so the more, I said in the book, more is more. The more you can be emotionally and physically present in those first 3 years to do that emotional regulation for your child from moment to moment, because we're not born with that capacity, the better off your child will be. And so you could take that as you will. You could say, well, maybe it's better for me to work part-time or work from home, or maybe I'll take a year off and then work part. But it was about prioritizing. And the second book is the same. If we don't prioritize our kids, if we aren't present physically and emotionally enough in these two critical windows, our kids do not have that solid foundation. What they do is they create defenses, and some of those defenses aren't healthy defenses.
I can definitely agree with that. And as the mother of a 15-year-old daughter, I'm right in the middle of all of this anxiety, and I'm seeing the impacts that are happening, from 6th grade through 10th grade. We've seen bulimia and anorexia and, cutting and suicide, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I was a little shocked to hear my daughter say the other day that, oh, her friend had a bad relationship with her mom, and her mom would be so angry at her, and these sort of things. And I said, baby, her mom is going to want to just wrap her in love and help and support her through a challenging time. And, so it was even my daughter, who I've tried to build that openness with, had that little wall of, I'm going to be judged. How can parents take down that wall of, oh, my mom's going to be so mad at me, and keep those lines of communication open?
Well, it's good to know some neuroscience, right? Because it's understanding the brain that helps us to understand our children, partly. And there is something called asymmetrical brain development that's going on, which means that the threat sensing part of the brain, or the amygdala, which is sort of the part of the brain that regulates stress, is very active during adolescence. And what that means is that adolescents are very sensitive to criticism of any kind. They are very sensitive to rejection of any kind. So you as an adult might feel a little bit of criticism, harshly, whatever. An adolescent will feel it 100 times more harshly. And so I don't know what that relationship is actually like between that kid and that parent, but I'm guessing that however that parent is expressing themselves, that is being amplified. And so we have to be aware of not just what we say to our kids, how we say it, our tone, whether we say it calmly, whether we can regulate our own emotions, because things get interpreted by adolescents in an amplified way. And they're very alert for any kind of, and which is why social media is so harsh for them. I look at social media, I'll flip through it, and look, I mean, as you said, my first book, I got a lot of people like coming at me on Twitter, and I looked at it and I said, well, you can't please everyone, and they misunderstood it, but an adolescent would look at that and be crushed. So we also have to understand that part of what they're experiencing is actually part of their brain development. It is eventually the emotional regulation part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, catches up, and then it neutralizes that kind of threat sensing part. But that is what's happening.
Definitely.
I know you talk a lot about connection,
Mm-hmm.
but do you think when it comes to social media, we need to, as a society, kind of disconnect?
So I'm a realist. I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. So that means that I don't see that happening in society. I see that we can mitigate some of the or regulate some of what's happening. One thing I tell parents of adolescents is delay, you can give them a phone, but delay social media as long as you can. And it's unrealistic.
What age do you think that it's appropriate to give them a phone?
It depends on where you live and how they live. In New York City, we put them on buses, we put them on public school buses, we put them on buses around the city. And so sometimes we want to know that we can reach them, but when they're very young, you can give them a flip phone, just so you can reach them. You can give them a smartphone and disable social media until they're about at least 13. I would say do not let them have any social media apps. And if you can delay it till 14, do it. 15 even better, but that's not realistic. So, at least until 13, no social media. And again, it's because of the impact that these images, these idealized images, because the other thing that's happening is they're very perfectionistic, even if everything goes well. Adolescents are very binary. You're either perfect or you suck. You're good or you're bad, right? You're a good student, you're a bad student. You're a great athlete or you suck. I mean, it's sort of like that. They're very binary. So we want to keep them away as long as we can. And then we want to regulate it from the beginning. If you give a smartphone to an adolescent and you don't set the rules from the beginning, it's very hard to impose the rules later. So what do they say? Prevention is a pound of cure. But all is not lost. If you've given them a phone, you didn't set the rules, how many hours they're allowed to be on it. The basket, as you said, the basket they can put their phone in after they've had their phone for an hour, there's a basket, and everybody, including parents, puts their phone and their devices in a basket, and it doesn't get touched again until the next day. So the other thing is that parents have to model this behavior. So if you're going to say to your adolescent, you can't touch your phone anymore, and you're sitting there on your phone, I can't think what drives me crazy in New York to see people sitting on their phones in restaurants, not talking to one another, parents and adolescents sitting there all together as if it's normal, like living in a crazy world where people don't interact anymore. So if you're going to take their devices away after a certain period of time as part of the rules, you have to give up your devices too.
Mm-hmm. I actually, when my daughter was younger, I would be driving home and say, baby, guess what? No work tonight, so that I could put my phone and tell her I'm turning my phone off. And it was really more about telling my brain to stop, to stop working. And of course, the excitement from her to say, oh my God, mom's really here was priceless. And it was definitely the reward that kept me turning it off.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to also just talk about the impacts of cancel culture. I feel like we're in this divide right now where instead of bringing people together, we're going back and wiping people out for things that happened decades before we were even born. And I think there's a difference between sensitivity and just creating worse divides. So I think you wrote an article about that in the Wall Street Journal too. What are your thoughts on cancel culture?
Well, I mean, my thoughts, and I write about it in the article, are that we've created a world where you can't say the wrong thing, you can't do the wrong thing, and you can't make mistakes. And that's a frightening world to live in, whether you're an adult or a child or an adolescent. But for adolescents, as I said, because criticism cuts much deeper for them than it does for us, it is really toxic. And what I mean by that is we learn by making mistakes. We learn by saying the wrong thing. We learn by doing the wrong thing. That's what we tell our young children anyway, right? We tell them that it's okay to make mistakes. Hopefully we tell them that. I encourage that it's okay to make mistakes. That's how you learn. Next time you might make a different choice. And that's all, it's all part of growing up, right? We can't say that to our adolescents anymore, because if they say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, the punishment no longer fits the crime, and it shouldn't be punishment anyway. You know, the word discipline means to teach by example, right? Comes from the Christian idea of disciple. To be a disciple is to learn by example, right? So we're supposed to be learning when we make mistakes. We're not supposed to be punished when we make mistakes. And that's a very different mentality. So I think what's happened is we've become a society that is very punishment oriented, and very harsh, and that's a problem for adolescents.
Our guest is Erica Komisar, and her book is Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. Is there any hope given in your book?
Lots of hope. I'm a very hopeful person. The hope is you have an opportunity as a parent to make such a difference in your child's life from 9 to 25. I mean, after they leave your house, after they leave your home, it gets harder. But that's not the only reason it gets harder. It's not the main reason. It gets harder because there's a lot of brain development that's going on, reorganizing and reshuffling, and pruning of brain cells and neurons that makes it possible for you as a parent to have a great impact on your child's emotional development and their mental health going forward. Remember, setting that foundation, that platform for the future for resilience. And in the book, I talk about all the things you can do as a parent. I can just name a few. Being non-judgmental. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, listening more than we speak, not giving advice to your children unless they ask for it, instead being a source of understanding. There's so much in the book that helps you to create a closer bond with your adolescent, to create more intimacy with them, because in the end, we want our adolescents to be healthy, but we want to be closer to them. That's the whole point of it, right? So it is a very hopeful book that there's a lot you can do to ensure that they are mentally healthy going forward into adulthood.
Now, if you've got an adolescent that's preparing to go to college,
Mm-hmm.
and they're preparing to leave the nest, and how can you prepare them in that time to go, to make sure that they know that they can reach out and that it's okay to be not okay, and find resources?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, because all of that, preparing them to separate in that way, happens much earlier. So the more of a lead time you have, the better, right? So, and it doesn't mean that if your child is going to college in 8 months, you can't do anything, right? You use the time you have to reinforce that bond with your child, to create that emotional security. I always say it's never too late to change your behavior as a parent, to change yourself, and therefore change the relationship with your child. And so whatever time you have left, helping to prepare the way where you allow for imperfections, where you become comfortable as a parent with discomfort, so they can become comfortable with imperfections and discomfort, because being able to deal with adversity has a lot to do with being comfortable with discomfort. And we've created a society in which none of us are comfortable with discomfort, right? We have to fix it right away. We have to take a pill, or we have to make it better. And the truth is, the way to help your child to prepare for college is to soften the edges that are adolescence, help them to accept their vulnerabilities, help them to celebrate their strengths, but help them to accept their vulnerabilities and to make mistakes and be okay with it. And also just, promoting this idea that it's okay if you're uncomfortable. It's not the end of the world, and you can reach out for help when you're uncomfortable.
I think that ties a lot into the holidays too. And we were talking in the green room before the show, blended families, and you know, you can have today's adolescent can have divorced parents who've been remarried and divorced, and that's the influences and the cumulative effect of that can be very stressful, because you're disrupting the holidays, but it's preparing them for being comfortable and being uncomfortable, I guess. Or maybe there's another bit of advice that you can offer those of us with hyper blended families.
Well, I mean, again, the most important thing parents can do is the same thing they did when their children were 0 to 3, which is when they're 0 to 3, you're doing what I call moment to moment emotional regulation. So when they're in distress, you're soothing them. And the way you soothe an infant or a toddler is usually skin to skin contact. It's a calm tone of voice. It's affection. It's eye contact. There's a process, which is a lot of it's nonverbal with very young children. But when they get older, they don't let us soothe them from moment to moment, but still, when they're uncomfortable, they still need us. And this is a message I give very intensely in the book. They still need you to help them to process their experiences, their relationships, and their emotions. And so that means whenever they give you an opportunity, and in the book I call it when the door swings open, and I mean it as a metaphor, but as a real thing for an adolescent. If you're present when the door swings open, physically and emotionally available, you have an opportunity to talk to your child and let them talk to you about their experiences, their relationships, their feelings, their thoughts. And it's up to you then to do that kind of reflecting of their emotions. I can see how sad you are. I hear how hard that is. That must make you really feel angry. That's all. It's the same thing you did when they were 0 to 3. A lot of the same brain development that's going on, the vulnerability that 0 to 3 is happening again, 9 to 25. So you have this opportunity to process that experience of being in a blended family, to ask them how they feel about going to be with their father or mother or stepmother or stepfather, and how do they feel about going? Do they have any thoughts about spending? And it's that kind of processing that helps prepare the way. So when they're in college, they can start to internalize that and let them know that they can call you any time of day or night, and you'll pick up the phone and continue to help them to process that. Just because they're moving physically, geographically to another place doesn't mean that you're not emotionally available and physically available, as much as possible for them to still process emotions. They still need that through 25. I have a 22-year-old that still calls me when he needs to process an experience, or when he needs to process a feeling about an exam he's taken. He's still in his last semester of college. And, it's that we're there for them to help them to process.
I'm 40 and I still call my mom.
Yeah, that's right.
And before we let you go, I wanted to ask you, I think we're all kind of feeling anxiety after the pandemic. So I was wondering when we talked about those statistics early on in the show about 1 in 5 adolescents feeling anxiety. Did COVID kind of push us in that direction? And do you see this as a learning tool for all of us, for adults as well as adolescents? So hopefully a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, we'll be a little healthier?
So I think of COVID as an amplifier. It didn't cause this epidemic of anxiety and depression. It was already happening. I'd been working on this book for years before COVID happened. But what COVID did is it was the last straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing. And it amplified what was already going on. And unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to go away when COVID goes away. I think the cat is out of the bag, as they say. And I think that we will have many years of processing a lot of this anxiety and depression, but hopefully as a society, we learn from it. We know that mental health services are no longer stigmatized. We know that they're more available, even digitally, in places they were never available before. I have families who would never have sought out therapy or mental health treatment for themselves or their children, and they are asking now, and they're seeking it. So there's a lot of good that COVID did. It didn't necessarily in amplifying the situation. So we say nobody goes to get help unless their anxiety has been elevated or their pain has been elevated to a point where they feel in pain and need to reach out for help. So in a way, that's what COVID did. It made people feel what was going on just under the surface. And now they're getting help. So not all bad.
So where can everybody get the book?
It's available on Amazon and all the online bookstores. It's available in bookstores as well. And you can also go to my website, which is www.komisar.com, and you can connect to those websites where it's sold as well.
A lot of good stuff. We could go on and on. We appreciate your time. We wish you a happy Turkey Day and hope to have a cocktail with you sometime soon.
I hope so. Thank you for having me on.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Join us next week for another edition of PRosé with Vicki Locke and Cindy Woolley from C2 Communications.